If you are on our email or mailing lists, you probably received a letter this week about some misconduct in our from a member of our congregation. If you've not received such a letter, there are hard copies at the back of the sanctuary on the bookshelf under the board minutes slot. And during the potluck, when folks head outside, I'm going to hang back in here. If anyone wants to stay and talk and process together, I'll be here and we can do that. If you'd rather have a conversation with me one-on-one, you can reach out by phone, text, email, any of the ways. I'm happy to do that too.
As we prepare to be fully together, I remind you to silence your phones and devices. We now enter a space of worship. I invite you to join me in our chalice lighting words as the flame is lit. If you don't know them by heart, they're number 448 at the back of the gray hymnal. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope in sign for quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Scobie Beer and a member of this congregation, and I'm going to be telling a story this morning, but as an opening thought or opening words, perhaps we can contemplate the wonder of, as biology tells us, we're a combination of nurture and nature, nature being our biology given to us, and nurture being the conditions of life, the conditions we're born into, the conditions that then are formative in our life and that we respond to constantly, and throw into this mix the capacity of free will and making choices for ourselves within the confines of the conditions we find ourselves in. So that's my opening thought.
Okay, folks, we are going to sing together, nice and strong. Hymn number 349 is our opening hymn. We gather together. I'm going to play a short intro for us. And we'll get going.
We are a community that holds one another in our celebrations and in our pain. We welcome you to share your joys and sorrows by writing them down on the card you found on your chair and placing it in the basket when it comes by you, or typing it in the chat box in Zoom. Know that whatever your heart is holding today, whether shared or not, we are with you.
The monsoon rains are beginning to taper off now as we enter the month of Bado. Across the Ganges plain where the great holy river and all its tributaries meander, the rice crop is now full height with the kernels of grain forming, though still milky in their green coats. The paddies, now still flooded, will soon be draining as the rains subside and harvest time approaches. The harvest is a happy time, a time of intense labor, but labor shared communally as families gather in their ket, their fields, hasias in their hands. This is a hasia. You may recognize it as a small sickle. And so it was with my family too. The family I was then living with in the village of Jogikuti in Western Nepal, just under the first range of hills that then step backward and backward 300 miles to the high Himalayas. But this village was located right on the very edge of that vast plain that stretched for hundreds of miles across North India. Solti, Aunus. Solti was my given Nepali name, the closest name they knew that sounded a little like Scobie. Solti, Aunusta. Come, Solti, they called. Kaha jane ho? Where are we going? I asked. Ketma, to the fields. Dan katnalai, to cut the rice. Mapani ansu? I should come too? I asked, a little doubtful of what I might contribute to this enterprise. Hotani, of course, yes. Aunusta, come. And so it began. My life as a seemingly fully adopted sibling to a peasant farming family in Nepal during my time as in Peace Corps service as a PC volunteer in the early 1970s. Thus begins a story.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts support our church in its work. That work is summarized in our covenant. The covenant for UUCC says, in service of the values that unite us, we will recognize the inherent value of each person, foster a community of compassion and caring for all, value our diverse opinions, and engage respectfully in all interactions. 1/4 of our plate collection for the summer season will go to Food for the Spirit, a nonprofit organization that uses the arts and creative facilitation to support racial healing, ecological justice, and equitable food systems in Western New York. You can give to this morning's offering by placing cash or a check into the basket, or if you are joining us from home, visiting canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate, or mailing a check to UUCC at 3024 Cooley Road, Canandaigua, New York, 14424. In either case, make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering. We now gratefully accept the offering. Now I will share our joys and sorrows. One member has concern for members of our congregation and their spouses struggling and staying strong, sending our strength. And from Peter and Mary Beth, our two friends, John and Glenda, are ending their life with cancer. I will now drop a stone for these and all the joys and sorrows left in the silence of our hearts. Whatever is in your heart today, we are with you.
Take this opportunity, this moment, to just settle in your chair. Feel the wonder of being human. As I mentioned before, this interesting composite and conundrum of nurture and nature. Tune into your breath and notice how you receive the world around you, literally by virtue of breathing. And that by that act alone, you are interconnected with all that is in the material world and the spiritual world too. Let yourself feel the benevolence of that offering that the world provides for you. May it sustain you, and may it bring forth gladness. Good morning again. This morning, I'm going to tell some stories that are formative to my life, born out of conditions that I responded to and made choices about many years ago as a young man. Again, I introduced myself as Gobi Beer, once called Salty long ago, when I was a young American Peace Corps volunteer working in Nepal in the 1970s. That choice was made by virtue of the fact that at that time I was confronted with the possibility of having to go to Vietnam. And Peace Corps service was alternative service at that moment in time, but not fully alternative. It just put off the eventuality of having to go into military service. In any case, it was a fortuitous choice, and I consider it one of the most formative experiences of my life. I could do an endless critique of Peace Corps and Peace Corps service based on my own short 2-year experience. No doubt, Peace Corps volunteers inherited not a little of the white man's burden mindset that they were sallying forth to enlighten the heathen ignorant masses. And I was undoubtedly not free of that arrogance then, or for that matter, am I now either, though hopefully my life experience has made some dent in that conditioning by now. This morning, I would rather focus on the doorway full of opportunity and possibilities that opened for me by virtue of my brief 2-year experience in the Peace Corps. I'm now inclined to think mostly Peace Corps service was service to me by virtue of how it altered my whole world perspective and influenced life choices ever since. I would like to tell just a few vignettes that perhaps create some minimal picture of that time, place, and experience without getting overly dogmatic in any particular direction. First, let's go back to that moment in late summer, early fall, when I was invited to join my family in their fields to bring in the rice crop. It was a time that still shines brightly in my memory. We walked across their fields to the far distant forest and stream, perhaps a half a mile away from the house. And there, all fully armed with our hasias in hand, we lined up in a row, perhaps a dozen or so family members, plus me and some others, and we began to squat and cut the ripened sheaves of grain by the fistful, turning and laying them down behind us where they could dry in the sun. I, of course, need to be shown how to do this, how to hold the hasia, how to bend and cut the sheaves, et cetera, et cetera. And my awkwardness and initial total ineptness at this process was a source of endless laughter and comment. Oh no, look, he's about to cut his fingers off, et cetera, et cetera. Or some other version of, this is how the white sob does it, to endless chuckles. But For me, I was in heaven. Here I was in this totally foreign environment with folks who not more than a month before were totally unknown to me, being welcome, indeed invited to join them in this celebratory annual experience of bringing in the harvest, that they generously had no qualms about including me as a full member of their workforce, and then by chuckles and laughter, affirming my sense of belonging, despite my marginal effectiveness at the enterprise, to this day still makes me smile with amazement. It was a delicious time full of great good-heartedness. Also, by virtue of my participation in the harvest, I was also able to witness the wonder of human beings immersed in labor critical to their survival. In this case, the production of their food for the months ahead, all by hand, literally. This was eye-opening for me. By the end of that week, we had managed to cut all the rice crops across their expanse of fields, and then brought, I should say carried, in Nepali the word is boknu, to carry all those sheaves on our backs to the threshing area in front of the house, which had been cleared and prepared just for that purpose. And then thresh the grain, again by hand, separating the rice from the straw. And stacking the straw as fodder for the animals for the year coming. To this day, I count this as one of the most precious and illuminating experiences of my life, and thus began an unconscious process of adjustment in my own perspective as well. Peace Corps might be seen as the junior league of the larger development endeavors offered by the wealthy developed countries of the global north for those undeveloped third world countries of the global south. My vision was gradually altered to finally see how keenly developed they were to their circumstances. Perhaps now we might well in the developed north be seen as overdeveloped. I don't mean to idealize or minimize the circumstances of their situation, being what we have called underdeveloped. I just wish to highlight the wonder of all the innumerable skills and unfathomable knowledge that they possessed that enabled their capacity to live essentially off the land as they found it, without any of the machinery we take for granted in our industrial-based countries. Of course, much has changed since 1971. In their world too, tractors have made their inevitable way to all corners of the globe. But this only highlights for me how lucky I was at that time to bear witness to what was possible in the absence of a petrochemical powered world. But let me share another short story from that time. And this too was a lesson of how working with the advanced contributions from the West could be problematic. At that time, I was employed by the Nepal Krisi Bibag, or the agricultural department, essentially. And they hired me to be an acolyte for the Green Revolution, an agent of change, helping these farmers to get up to speed with what was coming at them. Chemical assistance to agriculture. As such, I received seasonal field trials to carry out with willing farmers in my neighborhood or village. One such trial involved the winter corn crop. In this case, I was given 2 bags of identical seed and 1 bag of malathion. Malathion is a powerful insecticide and has multiple uses. It's used to spray houses where malaria is a constant problem. And of course, in spraying houses, they spray the contents of the houses and the people therein too, inevitably. But in this case, it was used as a soil treatment to presumably kill the insects in that field so that the seedlings of the corn would have a better chance at survival. Anyway, that was the trial I was given for that winter corn crop. And I had a willing collaborator in my neighbor, Man Bahadur Galami, a former school teacher. Man Bahadur was an intelligent, creative sort who I knew would understand the experiment as I explained it to him. We were to plant 2 small tracts of land to the corn seed given to us, but 1 plot would be pre-treated with the malathion in the soil, and the other would not be. Hopefully to show that the treated soil produced a better crop because the insect pests had been terminated. Well, I was not, I was raised a suburban kid, so my exposure to farm life was very minimal before I went in Peace Corps. And so I was subject to many of the same misunderstandings and misconceptions that my neighbor, Man Bahadur, was. We were both innocents in this process. And I was not about to tell him exactly how we were going to do this. And he, being the creative mind that he was, said, well, I know what we'll do. And I said, what? He said, I know how we can really make this a powerful experiment. We will take the malathion, we'll get a bucket of water, we'll mix it up as a paste, and then we will roll the corn seed in it for that plot and plant those little wads of corn seed wrapped in malathion paste. Well, naive Solti said, wow, that's a wonderful idea. I never would have conceived of that. And so we gleefully got a bucket of water, threw in the malathion, and sat there with our hands stirring up the goo that it produced, and got our bucket of corn seed and threw it in and happily rolled little balls of corn seed in the malathion. And then we set about planting behind his bullocks in front of us, dropping the seed in the furrow on one plot and the other plot. One, the treated seed, and the other not. Well, I didn't predict this outcome, but you can imagine it. The weeks went by and corn sprouted on the field that we had not treated, the seed, and not yet on the other field. And then another week went by, and that beautiful sprouting corn on the field that was untreated grew higher and looked healthy and green. And on our field, there was yet to be a sprout. Well, after several weeks, it became quite apparent that there would be no sprouts on that field. And we were both puzzled, but had to reckon with the results of our little experiment. And one might well assess the outcome of our misbegotten trial as a total failure. But actually, through another lens, it might have been a total success if the point of the trial had been to teach caution regarding the power of chemicals, especially when misunderstood or misused. There are hundreds more little stories I could share from my brief time in Nepal years ago. Many of these highlight the highly developed agrarian culture I was so fortunate to have the chance to observe before Western ways had had a complete influence. For example, I could watch Ba in the springtime when he was preparing his implements to begin plowing for the rice crop. He would go to the forest, he would find just the right tree that had a bend and a big root going off in one direction. He would cut that tree from the forest, he'd bring it back, and he would shape it into a plowshare. He would go to the bazaar, he would buy just the right long iron pin, one of the few pieces of iron that he owned, and he would staple it in the front of that bent tree that he had formed, and to his liking, and then he'd put a handle in it through another hole on top, and by that act of creation, he produced his plowshare for the year. I'd watch the girls go off and collect just the right grass from some special place that they knew to come back and rethatch the barn roofs. Or I'd watch them sit during the day as they're gabbing, and there was never a wasted moment. You know, they may have seemingly been just spending social time, but all the while they would be doing something like making rope from straw to tie the animals, to tether the animals to, or some other menial class, like grinding corn on the front steps with a one grinding stone they had. And the neighbors would come there and share that stone for producing flour to make chapatis or whatever. It was, you know, I was in a land of just wonder and fascination to be able to bear witness to skills that I was utterly unfamiliar with, that they knew by heart, and filled the days of their lives. And on and on and on. Underdeveloped, I should say not. But just at that moment in time, they were confronting the ways of the West. And so I inevitably functioned as an intermediary And I shouldn't diminish my role completely, because my education and background did provide, on some level, a source of information for them to take in and bounce off their traditional ways. I can remember, for example, one day showing Conchi, the youngest daughter in the family, the little tiny yellow egg sacs on the back of a cabbage leaf that I'd seen a cabbage butterfly come and lay there, and explained to her that that's, what produced the worms that would then appear and eat holes in the cabbage. And she was fascinated by that little bit of information, and it's something she apparently hadn't put together in her own mind yet. But finally, I'd like to go back to that harvest time moment in the first fall after my arrival in Jogikuti. Although I did not mention him, there was that year also in our company an itinerant laborer, just a young man who traveled the roads and obviously was of very meager resources, and farmed out his labor to one family after another during the harvest time. And so it was with us. And at first, and I never knew his name, but it was obvious that they knew him and welcomed him and were glad for his good company. And I remember his presence, hardworking and gracious in his ways, and obviously a focus of attention from the women in our family. He joked and told stories that just seemed to ease the weight of whatever the day's labor might be. And at the end of the week, as he was about to move on, I had the sudden impulse to share something with him. And looking around my own meager trove of things in my room in the house, I fixed on a rather fancy shirt that had been given me, and I'd not yet seen the opportunity to wear. And I handed it to him, just an impulsive act of generosity for someone I felt an affinity for at the end of our work week. He was stunned and baffled, and a little uncertain whether it was appropriate for him to take this garment. And I remember he was standing in the doorway of my room in the house, and my mother of the household, Amaji, was standing behind him, and she was going, and I don't know what all the many violations I was probably of tradition in that moment. Perhaps he was very low caste and he wasn't supposed to set foot in the house. Perhaps, it was inappropriate for me to be offering him anything. I know not, but I just know she had a reaction to what was going on. But I insisted. I rather took advantage of my ignorance and insisted on giving him that shirt. And he finally took it in hand and he contemplated it for a moment. And he then took off his sackcloth t-shirt that had years of grime and sweat and dirt on it, and left it behind in the yard and put on my rather fancy knitted shirt and walked on down the road proudly. And Lord knows how that exchange might have altered his own sense of who he was in the world and how it would influence his next encounter. Hopefully he was still able to find work without his sackcloth t-shirt. But I don't know what transpired after that moment. I just know that it left me with a feeling of total gladness and and joy. Somehow it's memories of this sort that I most value from my time in Nepal. A moment of shared human to human, deep connection and mutual appreciation. And I'll close with that. And thank you for listening to my little stories today.
If you could rise, embody your spirit. We'll we'll have our closing hymn number 345. 15.
Yes, folks, and I just wanted to say a quick thank you for having me this summer. This is the third time I've had the pleasure to play for you guys. Special thank you to Bill for inviting me and for to all of you for receiving me. And hopefully
Please join me in our words for extinguishing the chalice. If you don't know them by heart, they can be found at number 456 at the back of the gray hymnal. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.